Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the worst 10 brawlers in the game right now. So a lot of the really bad brawlers did receive some type of buff, and also the meta shifted a little bit. So we're going to be taking a look, see who the worst brawlers are, and also give some balance changes to them. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So firstly, we're going to be jumping into the 10th worst brawler in the game right now. We have Janet. So you guys might be very surprised because Janet has always been like a top 5, top 10 brawler within the meta. But of course, a couple of months ago, she received 4 nerfs. A lot of nerfs to her health over time, her damage over time, and also her gadgets just really made her pretty unusable. So right now it's a very tanky meta. Doug and Rosa got buffed, and just overall Janet doesn't really fit into the meta. There are a few maybe underrated scenarios where you can pull out a Janet, but often than not, she's actually, whenever she's picked, she's used as like a mid in gem grab, for example, and she can still at least get some value out of her gadget on really grassy maps like double swoosh. But again, more often than not, there's a better option. And the fact that it now takes 7 shots to get your super, you can actually easily close down a Janet without her getting away. So for me, I just think she's really bad in this meta. The next up, as the 9th worst brawler in the game right now, I went with BBs. So a lot of you BB mains will definitely disagree with me, but I just think in terms of value, she actually gets one of the least value out of pretty much all of the tanks in the game. She's so easy to counter, and the last time she actually got a meaningful buff was, I think it was in December last year, and it was like a 200 HP buff, which is nothing. She got a buff recently to her extra sticky gadget, which again has really done nothing for her, and she's just slowly getting worse. As other brawlers are getting buffed, she's just being left alone. And for me, I think the only viable scenario where I see her in competitive is maybe on pit stop, where she can be somewhat underrated, but that's only in East Asia. That's not really been replicated in other regions. So for me, BB is definitely on the down. I'm 100% a bottom 15 brawler. So moving into the 8th worst brawler in the game right now, I went with Mandy. So Mandy, ever since her release, has been an incredibly underwhelming brawler. Of course, her super has a really big potential and can potentially carry the game, but at the same time, if you miss that super, it takes 5 shots to get. So you're not going to be able to actually recycle that super in time to really make an impact. So in terms of ladder, casually, you can play Mandy pretty easily on knockout and bounty, but again, you have to be a skillful player or face really bad players, because more often than not, if Mandy misses a few shots, you can just close the gap onto her and take her down so easily, especially with her against her fellow sharpshooters. For me, she hasn't received any buff. I think she received a buff in January in terms of how quickly she can focus her shot, but since then there's not been a meaningful buff. There's been a buff to one of her star powers, which nobody uses. So for me, it's a little bit strange. I don't know why they're holding back on the Mandy buffs, because for me, she's never even been close to the meta, and definitely one of the worst right now. So next up, as the 7th worst brawler in the game right now, I went with Edgar. So Edgar, the only reason why he's increased in viability is because on a few maps in competitive, he's being used on like Hot Potato, for example, where it can actually be a really good option, especially against the squishier brawlers. But I think as time goes on, again, I think he will slowly go down to being one of the worst brawlers in the game. But for now, at least he's being used on a few scenarios, and he's a pretty good last pick sometimes if the enemy team have like really low DPS, or if they don't have any kind of pushback mechanics. But as games go on, as you guys realize, assassin brawlers really do have it in terms of having to face so many different counters. You know, for example, even like brawlers like Cordelius recently received a mute gadget. You've got brawlers like Maisie who can just stun so easily. So Edgar really is struggling in this meta overall. He only got one small buff recently, which was to his HP, which helped him a little bit. But again, as time goes on, I feel like it's just going to get worse. So now jumping into the 6th worst brawler in the game right now, I went with Byron. So it really pains for me to say it, because I'm actually a Byron main. I was like the first person to get ranked 35 Byron, and I just played him so much in competitive. I love him, but he's pretty bad in this meta. He's so easy to counter. Maybe if you're a really good Byron and you can hit every single shot, but you need to hit every single shot, or else you're going to get punished by so many aggressive brawlers in this meta, so many high HP brawlers, which Byron just can't really deal with. He did, not even recently actually, the last buff he actually received was, I think, back in February to his reload speed, but that still didn't really do too much. So it's really been struggling for the longest time. I'd actually like for Byron to be buffed in multiple categories, maybe an extra damage buff, maybe an extra HP buff. Something needs to happen, because Byron is slowly going to be one of the worst brawlers in the game. So now moving into the 5th worst brawler in the game right now, I went with Gail. So Gail recently received a buff to his HP, around 300 extra HP at max level, but I didn't really do too much to him. But maybe I'm underrated him, or maybe the pros are underrated him. Let me know what you think of Gail in the comment section below, because people still think he's pretty strong. But since December, he's pretty much been killed. He received 3 nerfs, especially to his super charge rate. He can't cycle his super like he used to, and that just made it a lot easier for tanks to take him down. And also, before, he could deal with pretty much every brawler because he would always have his super to hand, and of course his stun star power just made it a really toxic mechanic. But now he barely has super, so it's really easy to take down. I think maybe he might increase in viability just because there's a lot of tanks, but still, there's just better tank counters out there. Okay, so jumping into the 4th worst brawler in the game right now, I went with Colt, so it might pain for me to say it because I really enjoy playing Colt, and so do the majority of players, because he's actually one of the most picked brawlers in terms of just casual ladder. But when you think of competitive and also the win rates that, or you even use rates, he's just never used. I think the only time I really see Colt as a viable option is maybe on safe zone, if like Brock and other damage dealers are banned out, but it can be underrated. But still, he's too risky to play, and especially with just so many speedy mechanics in the game right now, the speed gear as well, really making it hard for Colt to hit shots onto players. The last time he actually received a buff was back in December, so nearly 9 months ago, and that was only a 5% increase to his projectile speed. So for me, he definitely needs a little bit of love, whether that be with his star powers or gadgets, because he's just pretty unusable, and especially since Unbreakable Walls, he's got even less value out of his super and his gadgets, so he needs some love. He's terrible right now. So now jumping into the 3rd worst brawler in the game right now, I went with Mortis. So again, there's going to be a lot of Mortis mains that are going to disagree with me, but trust me, in competitive play, Mortis is such a hard brawler to use because, again, this brawler, he's just countered by so many different brawlers right now. So many gadgets, so many supers, so many different things that can stop Mortis doing what he needs to do. Of course, there might be like one moment in 10 games where you get a really flashy play with his super and whatever else, but overall, there's just so many different assassins that can do his job much better. He did recently receive 2 buffs with his attack damage and also with his combo spinner gadget, but I don't think that really helped him too much. I just feel like there's just so many tank counters out there for him, he just can't really do anything. So moving on to the 2nd worst brawler in the game right now, you guys probably guessed it, it is Frank. So Frank, I feel like it's actually underrated in some scenarios, but people are just scared to go him. Like, I've faced some good Frank players in Power League, and they can do some work by just literally being a meat shield, but other than that, he's pretty unusable. The only good thing about him is his HP. But the reason why I think people, Brawl Stars aren't actually buffing Frank is because, of course, in that mid-trophy range, he can be very dangerous. His win rates are still pretty high in terms of that, but overall in competitive, there's basically no reason to use him. Even if you're thinking of him to counter, I don't know, like Rosa, for example. Rosa is starting to become meta, and Frank is actually one of the best counters to Rosa still. I think it's much safer options, you know, bros like Shelly or just Tara, for example, which can be semi-decent against Rosa. But for me, you know, Frank probably needs a few buffs, but I just don't know how to really do it because you might be game breaking in the mid kind of range of trophies. Okay, so moving on to the worst brawler in the game right now, we have Hank. So Hank right now is by far the worst brawler inside of the game. So when he was first released, he had a lot of bugs, but not only that, he was just broken. He was actually one of the best brawlers I've ever seen on release, and they nerfed him very heavily. So many nerfs, and ones that really did take its toll on Hank. There was a couple. There was one, the fact that, especially when you're in a bush, that he was basically invisible. They took that away, so now when you charge up your bubble, you're visible to everyone, so that was a big nerf to him. And then another one was the fact that you don't automatically heal up when you're charging your attack with Hank, and that, for me, is the reason why Hank would never be anywhere close to the meta. I probably would do like literally a personal video on Hank, because there's so much talk about how we can buff him and make him a little bit more meta, and for me it has to be something to do with the way he regens, because I just feel like he gets overwhelmed so easily. He isn't able to put out pressure because he literally can't heal up ever, even when his attack is actually fully done, and then you have to wait another 3 seconds for him to even start the regen process. I don't know, Hank's just so frustrating to play. Actually one of the worst brawlers I think I've ever played in Brawl Stars history. Something needs to change with him because he's so bad. Let me know how you'd actually change him in the comment section below.